welcome to the At Peace Parents podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm here to empower you in your decision-making as a parent of a demand-avoidant child. My goal is to share insights that will generate aha moments and support your connection with your child. I'm a mom of two amazing little boys, one of whom is PDA, and I've worked with hundreds of parents just like you to teach them how to lead their child out of burnout and find the clarity, peace, and sense of community they need. What does making your PDA child or teen walk somewhere have to do with them being able to access their basic needs like sleeping, eating, hygiene, safety, and/or toileting? So today, I really want to help you get unstuck. If you're a parent who is working with a practitioner who might be operating on the surface of what PDA actually is, this live is going to be a game changer for you because I'm going to help you shift your understanding of the logic of PDA so that you can explain it and teach it to others in your life. Also, if you're a parent who this is something I hear a lot, has said, I've been doing this for years, or I've been lowering demands for a year, and things aren't moving in the direction that I want them to in terms of my relationship, in terms of my child thriving, then this live is also for you, okay? So today I'm going to break down the causal logic of what prevents our children from thriving and accessing the things they need to do to live, be healthy, be well, engage in life. And I'm going to pull it through with a very specific example to ground it for you. But first I want to frame this so that we understand where we might be getting stuck. So often when we think about things like lowering demands or providing our autonomy or using declarative language, we're most often applying that technique or accommodation in the moment of the child's struggle, right? So for example, with a child who's struggling to eat, maybe we're starting to lower demands around eating, which is awesome, right? Like, okay, you can sit on the couch and use an iPad to eat. You don't have to sit at the table. So we're starting to shift the dynamics in our home and we're seeing some improvements, but then we're plateauing, right? Why is this happening? Because at the same time, we're seeing the problem, which is the child not eating, and we're focusing all our tools and accommodations on the eating, right? We're not looking at it holistically and understanding that actually all of these moments throughout the day, whether they're at school, at therapy, or at home, are areas where we're actually not accommodating, okay? So for example, we might have lowered lots of demands around eating. We've given them lots of autonomy around what they eat, how they eat, when they eat, but they're still struggling. At the same time, we're pushing them to do chores. We're pushing them to attend a family event. We're correcting them when they speak to us in a way that's rude. And we're thinking of those moments as separate from the, quote, problem that they have with eating. For example, if a child like this happens all the time in my family, and sometimes we do correct it, but my son might be like, why did you do this, Mom? And blame me for something that actually has nothing to do with me, right? Like if he forgets to put something in his backpack. What's the instinct of a parent? It is to say, we don't talk to our parents like that, right? Because we're trying to teach them not to have this behavior. That's going to activate their nervous system. Even if you don't say it as the mom, it may be the dad or the partner who steps in and say, hey, don't talk to your mom like that, right? That's a choice point where we're deciding to correct them that may start to accumulate and impact eating, okay? Because everything with a PDA child or teen is happening in accumulation, nervous system accumulation. This is what makes PDA a fluctuating disability. Meaning sometimes our children, whether it's in their lifespan or even in the course of a week, can look quite disabled from life, especially in periods of burnout. Other times they may look fairly typical. Feel free to reflect on that if you're listening to this as a podcast. Okay, but what makes PDA fluctuating? Why is it that this unique neurotype and disability is so fluctuating and unpredictable? This is the cumulative nature of nervous system activation. What do I mean by that? Every single moment of every single day, as parents, as teachers, as therapists, we are facing a very difficult constraint with our PDA children and teens. That constraint is we're always choosing between either activating their nervous system or accommodating their nervous system. There is no gray space. So the logic of PDA, even for PDA, quote, affirming practitioners, is often looked at still through an ABC framework, which is what happened right before the behavior, what happened as an antecedent, a behavior, and a consequence. But for PDA, when we see the big behavior or when we see that our child is being disabled from accessing a basic need like eating or they're having a toileting regression, it is a tipping point that occurs over time and has to do with all the moments leading up to it until they reach their threshold of tolerance. So what is the threshold of tolerance? The threshold of tolerance is the point at which any human nervous system can't tolerate more activation. A brain that's constantly perceiving threat is constantly telling that nervous system, hey body, respond in a way that will keep me alive. And physiologically, that's very, very challenging for a body, right? Releasing adrenaline and cortisol, the heart rate is going up. We have lots of physiological changes that are going on inside the body all the time. So anytime the PDA child or teen is perceiving that loss of autonomy, even if it has nothing to do with eating, we're building up towards that point where once they cross that threshold, then they're at risk of trauma if it lasts a long time, and they're going to have more trouble accessing their basic needs, and their hair trigger response to things, either in fight, flight, which looks like defiance and opposition, shut down, or freeze, is going to be happening all the time. Okay? And our job as parents, teachers, therapists is to reduce that overall nervous system activation over time so that they're not at the threshold. Does this logic make sense? If you're listening to the podcast, just reflect for a moment. Have you been seeing your child or teen's behavior and struggles with basic needs in isolation from what's happening in the week or month leading up to it? Or are you starting to view it holistically and in accumulation, like a water bottle? Like every choice point we have, we can either accommodate them and we don't put a drop into the bucket, or we can activate them and we do put a drop into the bucket, and it's either moving towards the threshold where everything will spill out, or we're moving it down to create a window of tolerance. So this logic is one of the things that makes PDA so difficult to understand and why parents and teachers and therapists get stuck, okay? Because they're looking at struggles with eating, toileting, sleeping, hygiene, safety in isolation from all the other moments during the day when we're trying to correct, limit, set boundaries, etc. That doesn't mean we don't set any boundaries, but we have to view it in accumulation and holistically. So let's talk about what this means granularly and day to day as parents making these choices. So I'm going to pull this through with one specific example where lots of parents get stuck, and this was a big sticking point for me. Let's take walking. Making your child walk or your teen walk places. Okay, this is just one very granular example of where we as parents or teachers or therapists are choosing to activate our PDA kids to do a thing that they're resisting or that activates their nervous system, thinking that it will have nothing to do with behavior a week later or their access to sleeping 2 weeks later. I did not get this as a parent. Okay, so walking for me has been a huge sticking point. I love cities and I love locations where you can walk that are walkable. If it was up to me, I wouldn't have a car. I would just be getting all my steps in a city like New York or in Spain or any of the like European or Latin American countries that I've lived in. When we moved from Washington, D.C. to Michigan, we chose, in addition to being the place where my sister is and close to family, we chose a town that is walkable. Okay, so my home is 3 blocks away from the public school. My son no longer attends there because he couldn't access it. But it's also walking distance to little things like a comics store. It's close to a really cute farm stop and a cafe. It's walking distance, literally 2 blocks from a karate studio. Okay, so we chose our home location to be able to walk places with our kids and for ourselves. And so the first time this reared its ugly head, actually this is the second time, was when my son decided he wanted to do karate. And this was as he was starting to come out of burnout. So I was like, awesome, let's focus on all the accommodations we can do at the karate class so he can access it. I spoke to the karate teacher about the fact that he's not going to be wearing the karate whites, that I'm going to need to be in the karate space, his service dog is going to be there, etc. And it was all good. We had set up the scenario at the karate studio for an accommodated karate practice, and he was getting dopamine and he wanted to do it. But what did I do before the karate practice? I made him walk because it was 2 blocks away, and it seemed incredibly ridiculous to get into a car to literally drive 1 block to a parking lot and then walk into the studio. I can see it from my house if I look out the right window. So we would have these knockdown, drag out fights around me making him walk because it was so close. And I was like, well, if you're able to, bounce around on the trampoline all day and then go to this karate class where you're running around and kicking, like, why can't you walk? This is post quote understanding PDA, right? This is once I already knew he was PDA. I still had not had this aha moment where I was looking at it in isolation of like, I need to accommodate him to be at the karate practice, but he needs to walk there, okay? So what ended up happening? My lack of accommodation and providing him autonomy around how he actually got to the karate class ended up in him no longer going to karate. So we lost the money, we lost the opportunity, and I, doubled down on me being in control in this way that was actually counter to what I was trying to accomplish. Why did I do that? The judgment that I had for myself for wasting gas, for ruining the environment, the idea that if I didn't make him walk, he would never walk, the lack of what I perceived as logic, because if you can run around all day on the trampoline and then go to karate class, why can't you walk the 2 blocks between those 2 activities, right? And so these are all normal questions to have, but they're reflecting a logic that does not apply to our kids because everything is happening in accumulation. So is this making sense that that example of well, I'm accommodating at karate, and he's playing on the trampoline all day, because he's not in school. So why can't he walk between the 2? And I doubled down. And what did that do? That broke down the sense of felt safety, the trust we had between us, and the incipient attempts at trying to do things outside of the home, right? So this fixation that I had with walking did not just start here in Michigan, okay? Before I knew about PDA, I could see that my son wasn't doing well and he was moving into burnout, but I did not have that language. I didn't have that understanding. I just knew he wasn't doing well and he was having these feral meltdowns and he was starting to not eat and not speak. So what's a natural thing for a parent to do if you feel like mental health is suffering with a child or even with yourself? You're like, well, let's get some fresh air. Let's get some movement, right? So I started to try and in the afternoons, after I got home from work with my 4.5-year-old, I would be like, okay, let's take a walk outside, right? Let's get outside together. We can talk. We can have that one-on-one time. He did not talk to me and he would resist going on these walks. But I thought it was good for him because it was fresh air and movement. And I would do things to incentivize him. Like I had intuited the need for novelty. So I would bring flashlights, or I would bring him popsicles, or I would even set out these little pieces of candy so that would incentivize him to walk. And I remember my mom visiting me from Michigan and us trying to do this with him, and her just saying, like, he just doesn't seem well. Like, he seems shut down and lethargic and unable to walk. And eventually, as he moved deeper into burnout, more often than not, he was saying, my legs don't work. I can't. My body won't let me, right? And so eventually I stopped trying to make him go on these walks, but I was very, very confused, because the logic of like a neurotypical child or a typical like, let's help with mental health is movement, fresh air, being together, right? Especially for a young active child who used to be active. As he moved further into burnout, we would have to carry him everywhere. I remember this one time when we were still in the DC area. Again, I had intuited that like one of the only times he didn't seem like he was either completely shut down or going into these like feral animal meltdowns was when there was something novel. And so I remember they opened up this new splash park near our house in Maryland in the DC area, and I drove him there, and he was super excited seeing the other kids, which was a special interest. And there was all this fun new stuff outside of a brand new Whole Foods, and it was a warm day, and he just couldn't leave the car. And he was like, I can't do it. And so I carried him to the splash park and then watched him run in the water. And it was so freaking confusing, because I was like, your legs obviously work, man. Like, you're running around in the water and splashing and like bumping into other kids, but like going from the car to there was this loss of autonomy or demand or cumulative activation where I had to lower the demand of walking for him. Again, this is just one choice point we face as parents. Do we make our kid walk, or do we actually accommodate it? What do I mean by that? Drive them to a location that's actually around the corner, pull them on a blanket to the bathroom for bath time, even though they've been running around the house for the last hour, giving them a piggyback ride up the stairs, carrying them from, and I've had lots of clients who have talked to me about this, where they have to carry their child between the bed to the table. Then they have to carry their child into the car. To me, if your child can't walk, this is another one of those signs of them being disabled by cumulative nervous system activation. Okay, but this is a choice point we can make where instead of moving towards that threshold where they're going to have trouble eating and sleeping and having trouble with safety, we can say, you know what? I'm going to get out my wagon. You want to go to this Christmas Day parade, even though you're 10 and 6? Like, let's get in the wagon and I'll pull you there, right? And all of these choices that seem like they have nothing to do with these moments when there's an enormous meltdown or intense equalizing against a sibling, or when they're like increasingly not able to eat or bathe. Those moments when we don't make them walk have everything to do with those outcomes, because it's cumulative. So now, even though I have the gremlins in my head that say it's ridiculous to drive to a place this close, it's a beautiful day, or it's snowing and we're going to buy at this local store a sled, let's just walk because you're going to be running around on a sledding hill for 2 hours. Why can't you walk? I have to remember the logic of our unique kids, not every other kid. It doesn't mean that this is right or wrong. It just means we have to see our children accurately in order to change things for our family. So now I get in the car. Now we have an electric vehicle, so I'm much less guilty about this activity. And we drive the 1 block to the local store and we buy the sled, and then I watch them both run around, okay? And I'm making that choice as a parent to accommodate in that moment that seems like it has nothing to do with whether or not my son will eat the next day. But it does. It has everything to do with it, okay? Because it's cumulative, and cumulative nervous system activation leading to a tipping point is a very different logic than what teachers and therapists are trained in behaviorally. They're trained in antecedent behavior, consequence, snapshot in time, not the holistic picture. So you as a parent, we have to be able to communicate this logic and model it for others because we believe it, we know it, we intuit it. Like, if I'm out here spewing things that don't make sense for families, you're going to tell me because we all have PDA kids. I'm not just like talking from an academic book. Like, these are patterns that all of us have experienced. Now, through the work that we do, we've worked with over 2,000 families in coaching and live programming, and we only work with PDA families. And I just got exciting news that I'm just going to shout out, which is the fact that we are submitting the manuscript for a peer-reviewed journal article on how to better measure PDA based on this logic and based on the inclusion of basic needs and the idea that this is a nervous system disability. Okay, so this is all exciting news, but you guys are the grassroots front lines, and so you are the ones who I want to understand this logic. Even if from professionals, you're being counseled through a logic that actually doesn't apply. Okay, so we want to make that explicit and understand where you can actually communicate and say, like, actually, the logic of this is cumulative and there are tipping points. And so I actually can't do that behavioral approach over here and only lower demands around hygiene or sleeping because it's a holistic picture in accumulation. So back to walking. Allowing your child to not walk represents one of hundreds of choice points that all of us are facing as to whether we are going to accommodate or activate our kids. And the good news is, because it's cumulative, we don't have to accommodate 100% of the time. If we accommodate 3 out of 4 times, we're still reducing that accumulation away from the threshold. But we do need to see it holistically and not just in snapshots, okay? So walking is just one of those choice points and a needle moving tip that you can just start to experiment with of like, okay, here's one thing I can shift, right? And the more we can find these granular areas where our behavior is doubling down on something because of the way we think it should be or what's correct. And I gave you the example of me fixating on walking because I do this too. The more we can find these areas in our life of like, do they actually need to walk to be well? Or is this actually going to facilitate them engaging in life and engaging in joy and their basic needs? The more we can really start to move the needle in our families. Okay, so again, the theory of change, which is something that can feel complex, but I'm hopefully breaking it down so it feels more simple, is simply, are we moving our child in accumulation towards the threshold for what their nervous system can take and the point at which they're going to tip over into those big meltdowns, into trouble with accessing basic needs, and if it's continual, potentially into burnout and trauma? Or are our decisions day in and day out moving them away from that threshold and creating a window of tolerance? So even if they're perceiving activation, sometimes they're not going to be tipping over into this like really challenging, I exist in my survival brain state. So this is a new logic. It is a radically different paradigm, but as parents and as families, we want radically different results for our kids. So if you are someone who is feeling a lack of hope, or you're spending a lot of time in support groups where it's just doom and gloom, or you're reading books or speaking with others where it's just like, I've tried everything and nothing works, I will tell you from experience, as someone who works with hundreds and hundreds of parents, these are the choice points that people are not addressing. And there is a lot we can do. I hope this isn't like too triggering. I'm not trying to call anyone out. I'm actually giving you hopefully hope, because I felt very dysregulated and fearful when I started moving around the PDA space, whether I was reading things, whether I was in support groups online. And I decided, this isn't going to be my story. It isn't doom and gloom. We can make choices. We can take radically different approaches because I want something radically different for my family. And that might mean that my son is disabled. I didn't solve his PDA. I've just taken action steps to both support his accommodations, but also address the underlying resistance that I had to every accommodation I needed to make. Okay, so part of this is, actually I would say the most important part is radically accepting that you're either activating or accommodating your child, and you have to choose between those two within the constraints of your life. And sometimes you're going to activate them, and sometimes you're going to accommodate them. But none of us can escape that truth, right? I didn't create that. You didn't create that. It's just the way it is. So this radically different paradigm is the work that we do here at Peace Parents. And I teach you both to see your child through a new lens and shift your behavior in response to that. Okay, my friends, thanks for being here, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here with me at the At Peace Parents podcast. This is your source for all things related to understanding, supporting, accommodating, and advocating for your PDA child. To go deeper on any of these topics, check out my course offerings and masterclasses at the website www.atpeaceparents.com. To completely transform the way you think about and relate to your child and to bring peace and stability to your home, join us for the next cohort of the Paradigm Shift program.